Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Harvard University has sued the Trump administration in the fight over institutional oversight, independence, and federal funding for the Ivy League school. The Trump administration has frozen over $2.3 billion in funds and could cut an additional $1 billion for the acclaimed university, insisting on ideological oversight of Harvard's admissions and hiring processes and to restrict the enrollment of international students deemed hostile to American values. What studied these tensions between the Trump and the Harvard, and what legal grounds lie at the heart of the lawsuit? And is university autonomy now at risk in the U.S.? Join us for discussion live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Professor Joav Toker from the American Graduate School in Paris, Gregory Mahoney, Professor of Politics, East China Normal University, and Peter Kuznick, Professor of History at American University. Welcome to the show. So, Professor Mahoney, let me start with you. For those who are not that familiar with the lawsuit or the disputes between the two sides, so what are the core issues over which the Trump administration is fighting with Harvard?
Well, you mentioned a number of these already. I think one of the things that we're seeing is the concern about the disciplinary records related to international students. I think the Trump administration is fishing for information where they might be able to cancel visas and target certain international students as they see fit. We've already seen some of this happening in some other universities. There's also the allegation that we've heard from Trump personally that Harvard is a sanctum for the radical left, and that there's broad censorship, as well as anti-Semitism embedded at Harvard. And there's a need to make sure that the negatives are constrained, but also that there's more inclusion in terms of different values, different perspectives. And then I think we've also seen a couple of other issues that I don't think are necessarily being talked about, but we have seen the Trump administration across the country, not just targeting Harvard, but institutions all over the country, trying to find means for cutting government research, government funding to researchers as a means for trimming the U.S. Budget deficit. So there are a lot of issues. Some of them are directly political. Some of them are financial. And some of them are related to the America First agenda.
Mm-hmm. Professor Toker, so beyond this financial, probably necessary measures to be taken by the White House or other institutions, so if you look at the values, is that a clash of values between the Trump administration and, let's say, that of Harvard University?
Yes. I think so, very clearly. And not only Harvard and not only the universities. We're speaking, sure enough, my colleague was very right in speaking about our financial ambitions, cutting down the budget, keeping up with Trump's promise of bringing the budget down, checking on the utility of all kind of investments on the part of federal government, American taxpayers' money should be well spent, etc. But if we're looking at Trump's personality and Trump's policies and Trump's promises, we see that this is actually a battle on power. This is a battle on influence. And we see actually all the so-called natural addresses of influence and centers of influence under the being targeted by the Trump administration. So we're seeing the courts, the judiciary system under offensive on the part of the Trump administration. We see the media, the so-called radical left media, but media in general. We see academia, indeed, as part of those targets, and some more. Maybe we should include also minorities. Minorities is also one of these territories of power that illiberal, so-called illiberal regimes or authoritarian regimes target in order to bring up their own central influence and bring down the influence of other poles of influence within society.
Back to Professor Mahoney. So, in terms of like diversity initiatives like practiced by Harvard and other universities, I mean it's probably a known fact, as Professor Toker mentioned. It says a concentration of liberal minds, let's say, in the university, in the media. One of their practice diversity initiative, of course, in terms of hiring, in terms of admission. Anything wrong with that?
Well, I think it's clear that the right has long targeted affirmative action, and they've been able to largely push those policies following a Supreme Court ruling that went their way almost a couple of decades ago onto the public universities through the states, but the state government supporting that in many cases. But private universities, many of them continued to support various affirmative action policies and various inclusion aspects. But I think it should be made clear here that it's just because the Trump administration says that the center or anything to the left of the radical right is the radical left is a little bit mistaken. I think on the whole, what we found is that most universities were rather centrist and perhaps leaned a little bit to the right, although they tended to be very inclusive in terms of hiring and student admissions, because they found that this was good for attracting more students, attracting more dollars, and attracting more talent. When I worked in American universities before moving to China in 2010, one of the things that we found is that it was very, very difficult for universities to actually meet the affirmative action goals, whether they're for minorities or women or people from other disadvantaged backgrounds. And that most of those scholarships or other programs were actually being used ultimately for the candidates who were there, which were, for the most part, people from white or white middle class backgrounds. So it's a little bit of a disingenuous attack. Furthermore, we do know that in the case of the allegations of inclusion, it's partly about affirmative action, partly about LGBT issues. We've seen another front in the Trump administration attacking universities for allowing people of transgender male to female transgender athletes participate in women's sports. So there's a lot of this going on in not just targeted towards Harvard or targeted towards hiring, but speaking to this culture war that has long been fought in higher education in the United States going back several decades. And this is just the new iteration with this president.
Professor Toker, the gender issue or the hiring process, diversity consideration, I mean, is practiced often for the purpose of, taking care of the minority, disadvantaged. I think it's a practice in many countries. People understand the necessity of doing that. And of course, the gender issue is becoming a hot topic in the US. But, sitting in Paris, as a European, looking at the issue, what's your sense, of the fighting here?
Well, sitting in Paris or sitting in Los Angeles or in New York City, I don't think there should be a radically different way of looking at it. The so-called gender issues and gender gap is important. But the way I think the Trump administration is using it in order to arm the so-called cultural battle on influence is driven by efficiency, not by convictions regarding equality between men and women and things that should be done or are not sufficiently done. For example, I mean, this issue about transgender, it is an important one, especially for those who are directly concerned. But it represents a minor, small number of individuals within campuses, outside of universities. But it's an issue which, in terms of the large population, is an element which catches well, which can be spread around with a lot of speed and efficiency. So it catches people's imagination. But one cannot say that the controversies regarding the rights of transgender women or men is a central issue in the life of American life or American campuses. I would rather put it in terms of minorities I used earlier, because LGBT people, gay people are indeed under offensive, because this is the way illiberal regimes concentrate their efforts at, because one of the major and most important distinctions of liberal governments, something that American values had been so proud about for decades, is the fact that you do respect and you do promote the rights of minorities precisely because they are minorities, and because of that they do have full rights, perhaps reinforced rights, to enjoy more liberty and more freedom because they're living in a free society and in an open society.
Yeah, the issue of right and also issue of freedom there. Well put, I think. And of course, something related to another issue, I guess, in the, as Harvard says, there's a list of demands from the Trump administration, basically asking for the Harvard University to comply with. One of them standing out is so-called anti-Semitism, as Professor Mahoney earlier mentioned. I guess it has a lot to do with the recent development in Gaza, of course. Israeli war on Gaza, some would call it like an ongoing genocide even. Then there's student protest on the campus, Columbia University, Harvard University. So Trump administration always has a problem with that, Professor Mahoney.
That's true, but I think one of the things that was been so disappointing about Harvard and a lot of American universities is the extent to which they suppressed those protests. And as these were, people from the left perspective, they saw these as right-wing universities that were suppressing lawful protest, exercising free speech. And in many cases, I think the people who were protesting against the genocide in Gaza were saying that they weren't anti-Semitic, but they were simply opposed to murdering men, women, and children in the Palestinian territories. But that was characterized by certain elements in the United States as anti-Semitism, and then those labels were brought to bear against the universities, and this included the liberals or the centrists in the universities themselves. And so it's sort of interesting that Trump picked up on this, and we see Harvard positively acknowledging, yes, we had a problem with anti-Semitism, and they said it's the most insidious form of discrimination, which I think is a little bit of an overstatement, but nevertheless, that they were working to rectify that issue. So I find all of that to be tragically amusing, in so much as they're sort of playing into his hand there.
Professor Toker, if you look at the Trump administration or even previous Biden administration, many people say the U.S. government is strongly pro-Israel. That's a well-known fact. And recently, Trump was even described as the first Jewish president in the United States. That's how pro-Israel he is being seen as. And of course, here it seems like the government is trying to imply or apply its ideology over the universities. Somehow you have to be in line with us. That's pro-Israel rather than criticizing Israel. I mean, of course, there's a fine line criticizing Israel or anti-Semitism. Sometimes it's not that clear, right?
I agree that the overall policies of the Trump administration, Trump 1 or Trump 2 for that matter, are clearly pro-Israeli. And when you compare it even to the Biden administration, which was also pro-Israeli, you see actually that it's stronger, that American support for Israeli policies is stronger. However, I would introduce the nuance regarding pro or anti-Israeli policies, and specifically the government of Netanyahu in Israel for a long time now, and the issues related to anti-Semitism. We're not speaking exactly about the same things, and this gap and this perhaps gray areas between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, especially in countries which has large Jewish population, which is the case in the United States, in Britain, in France. This is a different issue. And you see, for example, over the incidents which took place at Columbia University, for example, one more Ivy League universities, which is under an offensive of the Trump administration, as well as Harvard. We saw a few weeks after the October 7th Hamas assault on Israel, we saw actually that the Columbia University authorities were accused in parallel of being too right-wing, so to speak, and pro-Israel, and too left-wing, so to speak, pro-Palestinian by different spokespersons. So were they too rough in some restrictions they imposed on those who demonstrated, sometimes violently, pro-Palestine, or were they too complacent with those who said that they are terrorized because they were Jews and therefore assaulted by other demonstrations? I'm not saying that the fact that you're accused by both sides to an issue or a controversy necessarily means that you're choosing the right path. But I'm pointing at the fact that the issues regarding discrimination in general, and particularly anti-Semitism with all the historical weight which is leaning on it, should be looking at with more caution.
With more caution. Peter, welcome to the show. Professor Kuznick, of course, we are discussing this, tell us, your understanding why the Trump government now is taking on Harvard University. What's the purpose here?
Well, the universities in the United States were the last institution that was controlled by the progressives and by the left. The Trump administration, which has very strong fascistic tendencies and hates anything that's progressive, has a strategy for trying to eliminate the influence of all the institutions that it doesn't control. Now, the two main ones that it's gone after have been the media, which is not controlled by the left, but is controlled by kind of a liberal centrism with increasing influence of neoconservatives, and the universities, which are very much the last bastion of left-wing thought in the United States. So this is entirely ideological and political on Trump's part. He hides behind this idea that the universities are somehow there's a lot of anti-Semitism. There's not a lot of anti-Semitism at the universities in the United States. What you saw in these protests was a lot of pro-Gaza sentiment, and that was because the people in Gaza were being slaughtered by Israel. I saw it in the protests in Washington. I saw it in New York and others. Yes, there were some people who went too far. Some people who used it as an excuse to go after Jews. But for the most part, and I saw my own Jewish students were very heavily involved in these protests. And what they were upset about, they were also upset about what Hamas did on October 7th. We were all upset about that. But my students and the protesters were mostly concerned that Israel was committing what most people consider to be a genocide. But the Anti-Defamation League and others tried to conflate the criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. And I can tell you, as a Jewish American, they are totally different. That what Israel represents right now is an extreme right-wing force in the world, and what they're doing certainly in Gaza and in other places in the region, Lebanon, and then their desire to attack in Iran is not something that most Jewish Americans are in any way supportive of.
Peter, of course, this is a legal matter. At the same time, this is a political issue. The ultimatum coincides with Trump's campaign focused on immigration restrictions, in terms of accepting foreign students, of course, data sharing with the government. The university is saying no. And so, what's your, the feeling, whether Harvard will win the battle, legal battle, or whether ultimately they will have to somehow accept the influence or, let's say, oversight from the Trump government?
I'm convinced that Harvard is going to prevail in this. Not only do they have right on their side, not only do they have justice on their side, not only do they have humanity on their side, they also have the laws on their side and the U.S. Constitution. And this is a different Supreme Court than we've seen in a long time in the United States. It's extreme right wing, but I don't think that even these people can countenance what Trump is doing. It's such an obvious power grab. So I hope that Harvard stands up. I didn't see it myself, but I've studied the way the universities caved into McCarthyism in the 1950s and fired faculty members. And I thought that the way Columbia responded was very, very cowardly. So I was glad, as were my colleagues at American University, to see that Harvard was willing to stand up and fight. Harvard has not had a distinguished track record in the past year or so, but finally it got pushed too far with this last demands that Trump was making, which effectively would have allowed the federal government to take over the university, decide on student admissions, decide on the politics of the faculty. And where are they getting their playbook from? North Korea? This is not America. These are not American traditions. The American higher education has been the example for the world, and Trump is trying to destroy that. It's partly his attack on intelligence. In fact, this is you look at this cabinet; these are the stupidest people we've ever had running a government in the United States, and they don't value education. They're trying to eliminate the Department of Education, and they're trying to impose their very, very backward, conservative, right-wing view on the American people. And you see how unpopular this administration is becoming and how quickly that's happening. So it's not only the stupid trade war with China that Trump has initiated, it's an overall policy that's putting, I might have used the word before, it's a 19th century word that's now being applied to the Trump administration. It's kakistocracy. And kakistocracy means government by the worst people. So we're seeing something, but that's why it's so important that Harvard and everybody else stand up, not countenance this, not yield any ground, because it's a fight for the future, not only of the United States, but really for the planet.
Mm-hmm. A very important battle in a sense. So, Professor Mahoney, do you agree? Here's the issue: does the government have the right to interfere? What about academic freedom or autonomy of the universities here? Are you concerned with what's going on?
No, I think there are two or three issues here. First, I recall after 9/11 with the Patriot Act, we saw a lot of policies and restrictions placed on universities, and I remember the universities banded together with one of the national associations to sue the government, not to oppose those restrictions, but to force the U.S. government to pay for the requirements that those restrictions were going to impose on universities. So we've often seen universities being controlled somewhat by the fact that they receive federal funds for research, but also federal student loans and other things. And they've often gone along with it. Now, I would be a little more hesitant about Harvard's chances. I was reading some analyses today, including one from Alan Dershowitz, the famous, I'm not a fan of his, but the famous legal scholar at Harvard. And he says there's no way that Harvard can win, that there's no constitutional right to get funding, research funding, from the U.S. government. They can cancel it for whatever reason they want. But rather what Harvard is doing here is trying to really go and push a hard case and then negotiate. So I would be inclined, given what I know of the makeup of the Supreme Court right now, which favors the Trump administration, which favors a very strict interpretation of the Constitution, which does not guarantee anyone the right to research monies, and would guess that we're going to see some sort of negotiation or eventually Harvard caving to the demands.
Well, Professor Toker, of course, by targeting universities, sometimes scholars or foreign students, for example, there's a chill in the academic world in the U.S. Some professors are leaving that country, and at this point of time, French President Macron has invited scientists from all over the world to come work in France or Europe. I mean, of course, given what's happening in the U.S. So what will happen? Do you see, a departure of scientists, for example, from the U.S. and coming to European countries?
No, we don't see it yet, and I guess something will happen in this direction. It was certainly a smart initiative on the part of President Macron of France to launch that. It's not the first time he is trying to profit, so to say, surfing on a rather controversial and problematic decision or preference of the Trump administration, calling upon scientists and other elite groups and influential groups to come over to Europe or to France because opportunities are perhaps more open-minded and less restricted in Western Europe than in America. He may be right. I mean, in terms of concrete analysis at the given moment, but proportionally, the capacity and attractivity of U.S. scientific circles and the extraordinary power of American universities in so many domains of research and development is in such disproportion to what the Europeans, even the ones which are really on the front of European research efforts in France, in Germany, in Great Britain, the gap is so decisive right now that even there is a movement, and some scientists and other may choose a European option in order just to go around, see, if you wish, what is seen as restrictions that this Trump administration is imposing. I don't think that we're going to see concrete difference and concrete process really starting. But don't forget that this is what's supposed to be perhaps the single most important power of America, apart from tanks and submarines and military power, this famous soft power, which actually is an American concept. The soft power, namely the capability to attract other people, to make you have influence because others are attracted to who you are, to what you do. This is what President Trump is actually targeting, if you wish, although he wouldn't put it this way, obviously.
You think
why it is so important?
You
not
think
only
he
that
cares
Harvard
about
wins,
that? Or he doesn't care about this soft power?
I don't think he cares about soft power per se, but I think he cares about power. And I think, yes, he cares about the power America has for whatever reason, and over whatever category in power. Yes, he cares about his own power at home in America and about the power of America overseas. Yes, he does.
Yeah, maybe not soft power, as we said. Well, with that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Qinduo. See you next time.